Thank you so much for joining us for these conversations on the Footprint Project, Dr. Maryanne. It's a pleasure to have you, and I'll be glad that we're going to learn from you and also share these learnings with other people, especially the young pharmacists who are looking at exploring opportunities, seeing possibilities, and growing the pharmacy profession by itself. So maybe for an introduction, you just let us know who is Maryanne.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. David. Thank you as well for the opportunity to just be here on the Footprints Project. I know we've really tried to get this opportunity, so I'm glad it got to happen today. So my name is Maryanne Favour Ong'udi. I'm a pharmacist with about 6 years of practice in the clinical space. I recently completed my MSc in clinical pharmacy, international practice and policy at the University College London. Before proceeding for my master's in the September 2022, I have worked in the hospital pharmacy practice, firstly in a private hospital in Narok, there afterwards in a faith-based organization called Kenyan Hospital. In both capacities, I served as the head of pharmacy services. And yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Fantastic, fantastic. So maybe from the starting conversation, you just finished your master, but you also in leadership positions before then. What was the experience for you as a young pharmacist in leadership, especially in clinical pharmacy, and definitely in organizations with the reputation and the work they're doing? Yeah. For example, Kenyan Hospital. So how was the experience for you?
Okay. So as a young pharmacist, I'll just be honest, I think the greatest challenge in leadership is usually from a point of you come off across as too young to take up certain opportunities, and that can really give someone the imposter syndrome, yeah? But then I would say the experience in itself for me was a challenge because I got it in a very unexpected way. So it's not like you're given an opportunity to mull and sit and decide, do I want this position or not? It's like a vacuum was created, my boss resigned, and I was promoted to the acting. But then also you get to realize that you have responsibilities, work has to be done, there's a department looking up to you. I would say the experience really grew me as a young leader, especially because in my previous employment, I was dealing with a team of, I think we only had 3 people in the pharmacy team, but then at Tenwek, I had a team of about 30. So, it brings about the team dynamics, people management, and people management can really be crazy. But I'm happy that that is an opportunity that taught me how to deal with people. It gave me a sense of self-awareness, definitely through interacting with some of my mentors who've been in leadership spaces and advised me on how to navigate certain issues. Because when dealing with such a large team, misunderstandings do come up. You get to realize that your modus operandi is not how everyone operates. You also get to realize that there's a perceived meaning and an intended meaning. So people management skills really come in handy in such a given position. And through the handholding from my mentors and also just getting to read books around leading, clinical leadership, I was able at least to do my best and get to understand my team, get to also know that a young leader also has a role in developing the team members in the various areas of interest they are keen on developing and growing, because ultimately it's not only good for them, but it trickles down to the good of the team, to the productivity of the team. I wouldn't really say it was a bed of roses, but it was a very good learning experience for me. Then also just getting to interact with other departments from a point of leadership and meshing in pharmacy on how the pharmacy services can improve the general patient satisfaction in the hospital. Those are rooms that if you'd asked me at that given point when I was applying for that job, I wouldn't have told you that I would expect to be in those rooms. But then you see, also one of my key takeout lessons from that is that as a young person, you really need to be prepared, because there's some leadership spaces that you'll find yourself there intentionally, but there are also some leadership spaces that you'll inadvertently find yourself in there. And I also quickly learned that the skills that made me a good pharmacist in the hospital setup in terms of practicing my clinical skills are not the skills that would necessarily maintain me in a leadership position. So for then that brought out the element of there's a knowledge gap, and there's also an opportunity for me to do better, to learn more about myself, and also equip myself so that I'm also of much benefit to my team and to the entire hospital department. That's what I can say.
Fantastic. And you are trailblazer at it, actually. You did a good job. And from some of the key things, and I remember there's a conversation I had with some of my senior colleagues, and they were saying, in terms of the observations around the practice, it is even better when we have young professionals taking up leadership opportunities.
Yeah.
In the argument was like, we are getting out of campus with an idealistic outlook to life. We see possibilities rather than bottlenecks and hurdles that we cannot overcome. And therefore, we are getting in there with the hope of, let us make the ideal world that we hope for. I think that was an amazing thing. And beyond your work in the clinical pharmacy, even being head of the pharmacy department in the respective institutions, you do a lot of other work as well. You're a trailblazer in your space, and having also pursued your master's. What pushes you to go this extra mile, and what are the key lessons that you share with some people that actually would be a motivating factor behind that?
Okay, thank you for that. That's a great question. I would say when I look at all the opportunities that I've benefited from, that I've been part of, and probably a few ventures that I've also just pioneered, there's a role of a young pharmacist in setting up spaces, taking up the space, and also offering yourself up for service. I would start with offering up yourself for service, because when you choose to offer yourself up for service, it means that when you think of any opportunity, there's a possibility of getting 100% gain. But then when you're offering up yourself for service, it means there's some gains you're forfeiting. You're getting probably 80% and not all of them, but eventually the 80% gains can count. So offering yourself up for opportunities means, how open are you to volunteer? How open are you for internships? I know the common notion among young pharmacists is that, I mean, there's no financial remuneration, forget about that job. I'm not picking it up. Those people want to use me. But then on the flip side, if you look at it, if you have an action plan and objectives in place, and you've actually identified a knowledge gap that you know by attending this seminar, by doing this training, by doing this internship, or rather by volunteering and learning under this person or shadowing this person, I can get to learn A, B, C, and D. That's a good opportunity. And also, I've taken up quite a lot of volunteer opportunities and some internships. Well, some of them I've taken them half-heartedly, but then as I look back and reflect, as you asked me this question, I realized that some of the skills that I really have, I didn't really quite sit down in a class and someone taught me, but it's some of these experiences that have really spurred me on and given me that opportunity to be good at what I'm doing. But if you look at if you trace back the steps, it was through offering up myself for these opportunities. Another big challenge that we face as young pharmacists, and I would line it up with one of the great lessons that I took out as I was doing my MSc, is that we always want to present ourselves as a finished product so that people can marvel at the outcome and what we are doing. But then it means a lot of imposter syndrome. It means a lot of second guessing ourselves. It means passing on and pushing away a lot of opportunities because we feel we are not good enough. We've simply not given ourselves the opportunity and the chance to be great. And I say that because I look at one of my projects that I do is Your Pharmacist Diary, which I launched and co-founded with a friend in 2020. This was actually an idea that I've been having since campus. But then, you know, with the hard mentality, you're like, you tell this idea to your friend, I'm thinking of doing this, doing that. Probably they're not in the same state of mind as you or in the same zone about founding an idea. But then you get discouraged. There are not people backing up this idea. So fast forward, I think when I was doing my internship at MTRH, I spoke to one of my mentors just after I'd completed my hospital internship. That's Dr. Vugigi, Sarah Vugigi. She featured on the Footprints project some time back. And I told her about the idea and she told me, and I rather asked me, what's really stopping you from launching that idea, you know? And as at the point she asked me that question, you know, together with all the second guessing and I'm refining it, I'm waiting for it to be really fine, I opted to give it a try. So the precursor to Your Pharmacist Diary was called PWD, Pharmacist with a Difference. So I launched it, and so my main focus has always been to create a platform where pharmacists can get mentored, because mentorship really played a great role in my internship and also part of my pharmacy school days. So having launched that idea, I focused mostly on my friends were in the hospital space because I was launching it when I was still an intern at the Moi Teaching and Referral Hospital. So then I think 3 months later, the psych died, the group was becoming mute, not so many people are participating. But then you see, I chose not to focus on it, finished my internship and revisited it a couple of, I think a year later, looking at what did I learn from it? Why didn't this idea see the light of the day? But then you see, it gave me an opportunity to actually analyze that idea, what I'd done, what are the possible gaps? Why didn't it, progress? Why did I fail at it? So when I was rethinking this second launch of this second idea, I learned from the lessons and the failures and the challenges I'd experienced. Had I not launched it or had I not taken that bold step and gone ahead with it, probably your pharmacist diary wouldn't be here today. So that's also one other thing that I really want to emphasize on. You are great, give yourself a chance to be great. And then lastly, it's about setting up spaces and pioneering spaces. By virtue of the education we received in our undergrad and by virtue of the internship experience in itself and the opportunities we've been gifted to practice, for you to be able to be a trailblazer and a pioneer in probably an area that you're interested in, it really has to start from a beginner's mindset. What is the interest? What are you doing about the interest? Do you know people around you that have charted that path before and are doing it successfully? What can you learn from them? Can you reach out to them? So in terms of setting up those spaces and taking up spaces, it calls for that courage. But then you see sometimes courage is not just the voice that roars. Before you get to roar, at least you should have done the groundwork and reached out to a couple of these mentors. And that's why I'm really usually so keen and passionate about mentorship, because mentorship is actually, I would call it, it's actually gaining years in days, as opposed to just doing those things by yourself. You can talk to someone and, have a sounding board, have someone as a sounding board, especially someone who's gone ahead of you and has started that before. So I think that's what I would say in a nutshell.
Yeah, thank you for that. And it makes a lot of sense. You've seen the value of mentorship in your personal life. And the question you're asking yourself is, how do we package these insights and make it accessible to other people? But not only using your personal insights, but also collecting other people's insights and making it accessible to as many people as possible. And I love that bit. And it's also one of the key drivers behind the Footprint Project. Because luckily enough, in terms of my journey for the last 5 years since I graduated, it's been a couple of good meetings. I would say coincidences that actually come out to be good engagements, then mentorships and people opening up opportunities for you where you never expected they would come. And that is a key bit in terms of how we move. And I love the fact that at the end of the day, initially when you're taking these options, you're not so sure it's going to happen. But when you look back, you get to realize, actually, if I didn't take that opportunity, it never would make sense. And that is one of the quotes that I love about Steve Jobs and his stories. Keep doing what you do. At the end of the day, you will be able to connect the dots going back. You can never connect them going forward because you don't know what the future holds. But in hindsight, you can see what the dots are. So that's amazing. So the next question that I will be keen around is, you did your master's in clinical pharmacy and policy. And one of the key bits that we'll be keen to understand is, what are some of the insights that you gained from that training that you think are critical for our local market that we need to embrace? And what are the approaches that we could make them be contextualized into our local country context?
Okay. Thank you for that question. I actually wanted to echo something that you've said about life. You can only connect the dots going back, and that's really beautiful. It is a lot of pressure. As a young person, you're really full of a lot of pressure. The pressure to make it, the pressure to be on the spotlight, the pressure to be excellent. But then it's, as you say, some of these coincidences and the things that we feel are just as a by the way can really mean much in our professional journeys. So back to your question, some of the key insights or rather takeouts that I can, top of my head, that I can share based on my experience in the UK. Number one, that was a global platform. And the thing with a global platform is that it gives you exposure to challenge your stereotypes, because we've all been brought up in different cultures and we are wired to think in a specific way. So challenging my stereotypes was one good thing and one good takeout from my just experience in the UK. stereotypes in terms of I myself as a person, as a pharmacist, as a clinical or hospital pharmacist, because we did quite a lot of hospital rotations in the NHS hospitals. So that's a good thing. And another benefit I would say is part of how the program is structured. The program is structured to help you be an assertive clinical person or an assertive pharmacist. Assertion in the sense that if you look at the formative and the summative assessments that we had, they were both inclined on what are you really contributing to improve the life of a patient. And I would just echo quite a few of them. We had, as we were doing our rounds, we had the CSA, the consultation skills assessment, which is pretty much you fill in and key in an instance where you consulted any person in the multidisciplinary team, what the discussion was about, and what were your key takeaways from that discussion, what did you present, what did you research about it. We had something called DOPS, the directly observed practical skills, where you also just write down something practical that you did while you are in whatever rotation you are in, preferably counseling a patient on the use of an inhaler or counseling the patient on how they can use their glucometers, or for example, any calculation that you did to that extent that improved the life of a patient. And you see, all these were dependent on your ability to speak up, your ability to actually notice there is a problem and go the extra mile and do something about it. So my level of assertion as a clinical person, I would say, has improved. And it's actually not even, improving is not the word, it's totally transformed, because I would say I was slightly afraid from the sense that you're thinking, what would someone really think when I say this thing? Am I really saying the right thing? So my level of assertion has also been worked on. I would also say policy, we had a unit called International Perspectives of Health, meshed under also a unit on leadership. So it was just also familiarizing yourself with, are you a clinical leader? Are you aware of your strengths? Are you aware of your weaknesses? Are you aware of how either of them contribute to the success of the objectives or to the success of the vision or the mission of the organization? When you're doing your talent acquisition, are you only looking for people who are like you, or are you going the extra mile to outsource talent and bring in people who can actually complement your weaknesses? And we further on went to do the developing a service proposal, having identified the specific gaps and needs in the healthcare system in our countries, and coming up with a proposal or a concept note to just show what is the solution you're bringing on board. How do you think this solution would work in your country? And I really loved that about it, because sometimes when you're probably choosing to undertake a master's or any program outside the country, your main concern is, how relevant is it going to be to my country? So the aspect of that course, international practice and policy, you look at international practice generally in terms of what are the social determinants of health, what are the health equities, what are the health inequalities, do we share something common, and is there a country that is excelling in this that I can borrow something from? And for these existing gaps, what is it that I can actually get to do about it? So in terms of the relevance to the insights, and in terms of bringing them home and applying them back to now our country, Kenya, I would say opening up my mind to also, I'm sure you've heard of the quote that there's nothing as international as a disease, yeah? So by you being in an international forum, you also notice that unemployment is something international, the strain on the jobs, because you get to talk to people from different countries, and you notice that in the healthcare setting, getting a job sometimes can also be slightly an extreme sport, but eventually these opportunities are there. So, you stop sitting from a point of, I'm from Africa maybe, or back in my country, there are no jobs, but then you move that discussion further to, what is it that we can do to create more opportunities? How can we push each other? Because the challenge that I give to myself and to my classmates are that, have you implemented a service proposal? What are you doing about it? Have you gotten an opportunity? Have you probably gotten to talk to maybe your bosses in the previous hospital where you're working? What do they think of your service proposal? So that idea of challenging each other to just ensure that such things are implemented and keeping each other in tabs to ensure that you're making sense of the knowledge you've garnered all through, and especially over the 1 year. So in terms of making these lessons relevant, I would really be keen on the exposure bit, the assertion, and also the ability to just conceptualize and think of your country, the practice in your country, and see how relevant and what bits of this experience can you borrow to make that practice better, to make a difference, and to actually solve an existing problem. Because as healthcare is always evolving, diseases keep coming up, but then you see the policies and rather the solutions can also be meshed and addressed from a point of reviewing policy, formulation of new policies, and actually learning from international practice and borrowing from what other people are doing. And I would give an example in the pharmacy practice. Something like independent prescribing is something that's already taken off in Europe. In the UK, it's happening. And even, I think undergraduates, I think it's 2026, they're going to be prescriber ready by the time they're finishing their undergrad. And you see, these are things that they're so foreign in the African setup, I think, because of the policies and what really happens in the clinical space. So you see, for us to make a change, for us to also ensure that the future pharmacists can equally contribute in the clinical setup without conversations going around and what's your value, what are you doing, without the need to actually expand yourself and prove yourself a lot. The first point to start from is from setting up policies and coming up with a policy framework that would ensure workforce development, especially for the pharmacist professional in the healthcare space. So I think without divulging, that's what I would say.
And it's amazing. I look at it and I see there are opportunities, yes, and there are also new learnings. And one of the key things that I love about the conversation in terms of the learning is, one, there's the assessment bit. Rather than the assessment being more focused on ability to take notes and actually cram the notes and return them back, you're looking at what action-oriented outcomes are there. Did you observe something? Did you learn from whatever was being shared? And what are the key lessons that you observe, which is critical. But then the other bit of interest in the international perspectives on health is, as much as you're learning in a developed country, you're looking at how do I transfer this learning from this context into my own country experience. And that is one thing that I love about the opportunities that's the Chevening Scholarship and also the Commonwealth Scholarship. They're looking at how do you come back with these insights and apply them in the local country context. And which is most of the times we don't look at it. And when we don't look at it, then it means we are missing out on opportunities that would really be of value to us as professionals. So that is an amazing component that I feel we need to take advantage of and learn more from. And maybe another question that I would be keen to understand from you, from that learning, doing your master's and all that, and comparing it to your academic training in Kenya, because you did your pharmacy in Nairobi, Kenya. So what are some of the key best practices that maybe you'd say, these are achievements that we made from Kenya that we can take over and maybe inform from the other side? Some things that we're doing right from a Kenyan perspective, that is.
Thank you for that question. And I hope, I'm going to compare the Kenyan undergraduate system and the UK MSc. But I would say, so the question is what we are doing right. I would want to start from there. By virtue of me qualifying and getting to that school in the first place meant that my undergraduate training was actually right in the first place. They gave me the foundational practices, and they gave me actually just the foundation or the basement to pharmacy practice, yeah? So in terms of a comparison on the same, an aspect that I think we can borrow in our setting is, because the program was focused mostly on clinical pharmacy, so I would just talk about briefly the clinical aspect. So we get exposed to clinical pharmacy from the third year of our undergrad, so third year to fifth year. And we have a couple of series of lectures, and we also have the exposure to the clinical setting through the ward rounds and rotating in the various hospitals that we are in. So one thing I believe that we should borrow is, just to echo something you've said in the initial question, the question you've just tackled, is to what end? Yes, we're in the ward rounds. Yes, we're clerking the patient. We are looking at their history. Probably we're in the probably the surgical ward or whichever ward, the pediatric ward, but to what end are we doing these things? Is there an assessment? So that element of just incorporating assessments for accountability, they wouldn't really be summative, but they can also be formative assessment. Like, for example, what I just mentioned, the consultation skills assessment, the directly observed practical skills, so that you see as a learner in your mind, you have an end goal and you have something that you'd want to achieve by the time you're finishing up the rotation. I believe that is also an element that you can borrow and put in a undergrad curriculum. But then also in the MSc, the course was really heavily vested on evidence-based research. There are things like critical appraisal that I had not really learned how to do it well in my undergrad. Although in my internship experience at the Moi Teaching and Referral, we had a journal club that really looked at the critical appraisal of journal articles. So I had an idea, but that's also an area that I really grew to develop. And I'm sure it's also done at the master's level at the University of Nairobi, but just something to borrow in the undergraduate space as you're getting to learn about the clinical pharmacy, the various treatment of these diseases. I think it would really help to go an extra mile to just have the students read these journal articles, research papers, and see how did these people come to a conclusion that this is the exact way to treat this. And to also echo something that we did something on developing a therapeutic review. So a therapeutic review is pretty much, you're building a case for probably the inclusion of a specific drug in a formulary. That's also not something that I'd learned a lot. So someone can say, you are learning these things because you are at an MSc level or a master's level, but I believe that these core foundational skills are something that even a pharmacist at undergraduate, provided you're in the clinical pharmacy space, you can get to have neat bits of the same and get to learn how to argue out a case for an inclusion of a drug in a formulary. Because you leave undergrad, you've graduated, you get into the hospital setup and you're told you're in the MTC, the Medicines and Therapeutics Committee, we want you to help us develop a formulary. But then you see, we never really sit to ask ourselves, how did this drug get into the formulary in the first place? You see? So you see, by learning these foundational skills on critical appraisal, on, how to actually build a case based on literature, you can actually argue out for a drug to be included in a formulary or actually to be removed in a formulary heavily based on research. And the reason why research is really important, when you look at the inclusion criteria on where most of these researches are done, someone would really be excited when you say, when you tell them that the reason why we're including this drug is because in the NEJM, New England Journal of Medicine, it was argued out that this medicine has to be included. But then you see you're in an African setup. You're probably in the Horn of Africa. You see, do you know whether people from your population are actually included in the study? So you see, these are also elements, research especially. So we just move from that theoretical aspect of handling research as an undergrad in your 5th year, doing a project, because by the time you're picking a project, you'd also want to pick a project in an area that your supervisor, at least within their area of specialization, so that they can also get to guide you. But also beyond that, I think just being equipped with the basic research skills and what to look out when you're looking at an existing literature or a research material, I believe that would go in handy. So in summary, the two things I think that can be included is the element of assessments, formative assessments mostly, to just build the skill and the curiosity and even improve the psyche of the students as they're doing these rotations. I know you also have your own fair share of how the rotations were done when you're in the hospital setting. And also the element of research, because the goal is by the time this student is finishing school and anticipating internship, they're so curious and they really want to see what is done in the hospital setup ABC because of the knowledge that they have. And then I believe it would make that a fulfilling experience because they would now get to implement all this theory in practice and really get to identify if that's an area they would really want to be in because of the proper mentorship and handholding they received in the clinical practice. That's what I can say. But apart from that, I believe that the BPharm, the undergrad BPharm is actually really good. Yeah, because it's gotten you where you are, it's gotten me where I am. So they have to be doing most things right, but they can improve on some. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. And I agree. Our B.Pharm curriculum, in terms of comprehensiveness, it is amazing in terms of the content that is there. The key bit, as you mentioned, in terms of the assessment bit and also the outlook in what are the trends, what are the needs in the market, then actually you are learning with a clear focus on what are the probable outcomes. How does this knowledge translate to what I'm going to practice? Because if that correlation does not exist, then I'll be going through school just to pass an exam and get my certificate and license at the end of the year. Then when I get into practice, now I'm struggling to recall what I learned in year 1 of pharmacy school, what I learned in year 3 of pharmacy school. And that could be probably 5-6 years down the line. But if I already knew where this knowledge is going to be applied, where it needs to be applied, even when I'm getting into my electives, my internship and all that, I'm already infusing this information and these skills into practice, which makes it even seamless. I think that is something that we need to invest in. And there's a growing interest in research as well. And I love the fact that you mentioned that aspect on research. And there's that perception that we normally have is, I need a lot of resources to get into research. You've just talked about literature appraisal and critical evaluation. There's what we call systematic reviews. That is an area of work that we can actually practice and learn on as professionals that doesn't need much resources. You need your device and then internet connection to review literature resources that are available online. Appraise them by just doing your personal analysis and seeing, does it make sense to apply this particular product or another, or we are not? And then the last bit that I feel we need to invest in, and I think maybe that would be my challenge to you from your training with clinical pharmacy and policy, is to look at how then do we challenge our ecosystem to have evidence-informed policies. And when I look at it from the evidence-informed policies, I'm looking at when you talked about hospital formularies. We have essential medicines lists that are being developed. What informs our decision to choose product A over product B? And then how do we make that be more responsive rather than looking at what is conventional has been practicing by the WHO essential medicines list? What is happening in the market? What are the disease patterns that are existing and how do we inform that? In my role in regulatory affairs, currently I'm focusing on policy, and the policy aspect that I'm looking at is on real world evidence and emerging novel therapies. We talk about precision medicine, we talk about gene therapies, biotherapeutics and biosimilars, and even the small molecules. Most of the research was not done in our African context. So it means there are gaps in that information that is available and what is not available. But we have physicians, we have pharmacists, we have nurses who have been dealing with these medicines, treating patients in our populations from the time I was born, because I was born in the 90s when medicine has already gotten to Africa and Kenya. So people have been using this medicine. Do we have that evidence of the efficacy, quality, and outcomes for this particular? Then in that case, then the health technology assessment would come in to say, maybe I've been using product A, which is a small molecule. It takes 1 month to treat me when I'm unwell. But if there was use of this new therapy that has been recommended and that has been developed, it would be costly in terms of the price, yes, but it is a price that I'm paying and using the medicine once at the start of the month, and I'm done, which means more productive. What is the economic evaluation around such? And I think those are some of the things we need to look into moving forward. And that will ultimately influence the documents that we're coming up with, addressing our local needs, but also opening up the space and shaping the ecosystem where we operate. So that would be something that I would recommend maybe you look into and to guide us as professionals.
That's really good. And I like what you said, because someone said anytime you encounter new information, it's not really bad to encounter new information. But then also when you encounter new information, you should always look at it from a point of, if it challenges what you've always known as the norm, then it's a good thing because it gives you an opportunity to unlearn and relearn. And I like what you said about asking the question, what really informs our decisions for product A over product B? And I think being in that space where we make thoughtful decision-making based on data, and I believe that's where we are headed. We are going to be handling big data and just using data to drive our decision-making, not only in the healthcare space, but even in regulatory affairs, the space you're finding yourself in, and also just dealing with real-world medicine. I believe that thoughtfulness behind our decision-making is what is going to really count in the days that are moving forward in all aspects of practice. And I really like what you said. Yeah. So that's a challenge to me. I will see what I can do about it, but it's a good challenge.
I'm glad to work with you and see what we can do together.
Yes, absolutely. I'm open to that. Yeah.
As we move along, I'll be keen to understand from your training, from your experiences, from the work that you're doing, what are your next kind of trajectory, and what are you hoping to do, and what spaces can we see in the next couple of years, applying your knowledge and making a difference in our ecosystem?
With time, I always told myself that I really want to see myself as a leader in the healthcare space. But then over time, I've realized how vague that is, because the healthcare space is really vast, and there are a lot of differences and there's quite a lot of impact you can make. So in the spirit of being smart, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound, I would really want to develop myself in the health policy space in terms of developing policies, or in terms of revamping or analyzing policies that would be responsive to the healthcare needs in the population. But most importantly, also, when I look at the element of pharmacy practice, and I think there's a discussion we had earlier with you, when you look at pharmacy practice, I feel we have a lot of untapped potential. Untapped potential in the sense that when you generally just look at pharmacy practice in Kenya, there's usually a statement that is really thrown carelessly: show value, which is very important. But then also you see, when you tell a young pharmacist to show value, sometimes they sit down and wonder, why haven't all these people shown this value before, that I'm asked to show my value? Yeah. So when you look at pharmacy practice, there are aspects that need improvement. There are aspects that can only be addressed when proper policies, or rather a concept note or a concept paper or a white paper is written, or just someone in their own space takes this gap seriously, does something about it, and writes about it, presents about it, so that we have an evidence. So I wouldn't really say that pharmacists haven't really shown their value. Pharmacists show their value day in, day out, but the documentation of these values, or the evidence to back up the value that they have, is sometimes what is lacking. Because when you want to push for an agenda, for example, someone would ask you, where's the proof that, where's the proof that if independent prescribing is maybe approved in Kenya, we're going to see better outcome? Where is the proof that medication therapy management can actually help this patient in a remote setup? Where is the proof that if community pharmacies maybe in Kenya are funded by the government, they can bring in services like vaccination? So I believe we do so much, but it's really important for us to also know that in as much as we are doing much, there's a role for visibility. And visibility is not something that we can keep shunning away from, because I don't want to really be in the spotlight. Because if you're really doing something and creating impact, the only way someone can ever be encouraged, or the only way that impact can speak for the profession, is by you being visible about it. So that's what I can weigh in on the matter. And I believe that's what's really critical.
Yeah, and I agree with you. In my spiritual side, on the spiritual side, nobody shines a light and puts it under the bed.
Exactly. In fact, you should put it on a hill.
That value has to be seen. You have to take it to the world.
Yes. Yeah. So I see myself in the policy space. And number two, I'm really passionate about being a leader, or rather managing is not really the word. Healthcare business. I'm really passionate about healthcare business. So at whatever point, or rather, I wanted to say at whatever point I find myself in, or rather, I'm intentionally working towards or endeavoring to be in spaces that help me grow as an operations person, in terms of, when you're looking at healthcare business, how can you conceptualize it in such a way that you're implementing services that the populations need, or you're able to do an assessment and advise someone that they can tweak their organogram to make their business relevant, or you can also do a business simulation or an analysis to just be able to see what are the loops in this business idea, or what are the loops in this process that are either preventing you from maximizing on your profits, but most importantly, that are deterring you from creating that value or the impact that you want to the patient. And lastly, I'm really passionate about research. So I'm also currently in spaces that are helping me grow my research skills, and clinical research is also an area that I would want to delve in. Not to mention my passion for clinical pharmacy. I think I sing about it everywhere, but I'm really keen on the critical care space and also the renal just management of the renal patients, so the renal space. Yeah. So those are the 4 areas that I would really desire to be in, but also in the spirit of being open, I would really want to learn quite a bit about the regulatory space, because sometimes we think ignorance is bliss, but until you're in a forum where you have really spoken about what you believe you're an expert at, and a question is thrown your way, and you realize, but I'm a pharmacist, I don't know much about the regulatory landscape. So that's also an area that I would really want to just learn about it and get to know what really happens, because that's not an area that I've really gotten an opportunity to practice much or get to know much. So interacting with people like you, also a PN, getting to know. So you might see me in your next cohort. You shouldn't be surprised.
Looking forward to that. And actually, one thing that I've been telling people in the last cohort that we started our first lecture this week on Wednesday. And in one of the conversations, somebody is like, so do we all have to practice regulatory affairs? And I was telling them, our conventional approach to learning regulatory affairs and practicing regulatory affairs has been about processing documentation, reviewing them, submitting them for regulatory review by the regulatory authorities, and registering the product or maintaining the life cycle across the journey. Regulatory affairs is beyond that. Regulatory affairs looks at the training. Are you trained to be competent at what you're doing as a pharmacist? Because at the end of the day, you're a professional. You have to work within particular standards and frameworks. So that is regulatory affairs. Medicines that we're looking at, each regulation of medicines and healthcare products and technologies, they have to be, the clinical research has to be in a regulated environment to meet the quality. It has to be registered in the countries with the quality data that is there. It has to be maintained across its life cycle with robust monitoring, data collection, and ensuring that it sustains its value in the market. But beyond that, then it means everybody who is working in the healthcare ecosystem needs to understand the regulatory principles. Assuming you're a clinical pharmacist, you're making on your procurement decisions and all that. And then I bring your medicine and they say it is registered. How will you be able to validate that? What information do you need from me as a supplier to guarantee that you're actually getting the right product? You can look at what is available on the PPB website and all, good enough, but maybe whatever I'm supplying you, I've relabeled it to be the same and it's not the same. Substandard, falsified, and counterfeit medicines. In the NGO world, we have regulatory affairs within the global health space. You see Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation doing a lot of work driving policy, shaping regulations and all that. So for me, regulatory affairs is at the core of everything that we're doing in a regulated environment where any single miss is somebody's life or their livelihood impacted. Somebody incapacitated forever because of a near miss or a miss actually in the hospital setting, that is a livelihood lost. But it's because we do not strengthen our regulatory system. So I'd be glad to have in the cohort, the next cohort that we're having, but also see how we can learn together and collaborate as much as possible. And I love the one thing that you mentioned as well, maybe just let me say about it. The healthcare business, I am a proponent of sustainable business enterprises and ventures. And the reason as to why I'm into this is because I feel like businesses are the clear evidence of somebody making an impact. When you went to the boutique or whatever it is, the clothes store where you bought your jumper or your jacket you have, you saw the value that it had. And the price was commensurate to the value that you're going to derive out of it. And therefore, you paid the money. Even if you bargain, you got a compromise that works for you. And the person who was selling it got the value that they thought they got their value as well and the profit they needed to make. So it means if we're able to do business in all the spaces, including the healthcare space, in a sustainable way, we will be serving the needs of the communities who count on us to take care of their well-being and their health. Yes. We will be delivering our professional obligation as healthcare professionals. And at the same time, we'll be driving the economic development and prosperity of the communities where we work with, because that is the only thing that can create room for us to do more research, to do more investments and open up more branches and more franchises where we need to, and also to develop in terms of other facets of our lives. If that doesn't happen, then we'll definitely be failing. So I think that is a good area that we need to explore more about the healthcare space in terms of business, but we need a lot of guidance. I'm one of the people who are looking at those spaces, but we need a lot of mentorship and guidance. So let's see how that looks for us.
Yeah, that's really good to know. I think we are really like-minded in a lot of issues. And I would also say most young doctors right now or young healthcare professionals right now are partnering and coming up with a lot of clinics, probably business ventures together. Because you see, you can have a friend who's a medic, a nurse, a lab technician or a lab professional, then a pharmacist. So you pull together so that part of the core team that builds probably the clinic or the healthcare facility is cutting across all these cadres. So from the outset, you have the professionals that you need to kickstart it, yeah? So you see, as you say, healthcare business is really something that we need to invest a lot of learning in, get to learn about the landscape and how we can also build sustainable businesses, because, you know, we are moving to a time when employment is not really going to be sustainable. So as you're thinking outside the box, and you may also be considering partnering with your friends, have you done your due diligence about the healthcare business, and have you learned all that you need to learn so that you don't use your saved internship money to start a business without doing your due diligence, and then 6 months down the line, you're like, oops, I wish I knew, I would not have done that. So that's a space that we really need proper mentorship. And I would also be glad to just partner and look through how can the young pharmacist or the young healthcare professional be mentored by people or trailblazers who've gone before us, to avoid making those mistakes that they made, and to also just build a sustainable business in the times that we are currently living in. Yeah.
And that is important, because as much as we're learning from each other, we're also building ecosystems. And one thing that I noted when you mentioned the aspect of internship money, all of it you've thrown into the business, it goes down with it. I think it's a way of us following the thrill and the idea of making big money. Then you don't do your due diligence, you fail up losing the money. So I think most of us, we need to do that. And that is one of the key things that actually we are doing in the other initiative that I run, agriculture, health, and social innovation. So there's a lot of business ecosystem support services that we're getting stakeholders and senior experts to support us. So then when we decide that we're making a decision to pursue something, it's something that is informed with kind of practical guidance, but also saving on the resources. Instead of me investing 2 million into a business, I'll call on a clinical doctor somewhere. I'll call on a nurse. I'll call on a physiotherapist, on a psychologist. Then we have a team of technical experts. The only thing we need is an office space. We start offering the services. We start in lean so that we're reducing the losses in case we have to incur losses. But if you invest substantial amounts of money, then you go down with it, you might cry and never recover from that.
Yes, I tell you.
And I've been there consoling, offering therapy services. It's not easy, but these are friends, so we have to be there for them.
Yeah. Okay.
So maybe from your journey, maybe I have a question then as we come towards the end of this.
Yes.
Any challenges that you've dealt with at a personal level that you feel maybe have shaped the person you are? Because somebody would be out there and they're like, Maryanne, life is, everything is working out as she has envisioned and all the successes are there.
Well, there's always a behind the scenes. You know, when you see a very nice video, when you look at the kind of things that happen behind the scenes, you're like, oops, this was part of the process. So I would say challenge. I think I mentioned it earlier. Being in leadership, especially top management at a very young age, I mean, brought up its own fair share of challenges, from a point of learning how to do proper team management, and also just learning how to make the tough decisions, learning how to, you know, at the end of the day, especially as I also grew and learned and understand and learned how to understand myself, I learned that I'm more of a relational leader and not really a transactional leader. But then you see, most of the spaces that we find ourselves in, and most of the decisions that we have to make are usually sometimes situational. And you know, when you're making a situational decision based on the information you have at hand, sometimes the outcome is not dependent on whether you are relational, because sometimes you have to make a hard decision. But then also as a relational leader, you're more like, this is going to really serve this. You're thinking more about the person and putting yourself in the person's shoes. So that's one really great challenge that I faced. But like I'd mentioned earlier, bouncing off these ideas of some of my mentors really helped transform my journey, and just really helped me to be self-conscious of how I'm thinking, or the energy that I'm giving off, that sometimes is good, but it's not really good in this situation. Yeah. So that's why I was saying it also made me just go the extra mile and try and equip myself in matters leadership. So I just mentioned 2 books that were quite handy in addition to the mentorship were, I think it's called The ABCs of Clinical Leadership. And also the second one is managing and leading 44 lessons for pharmacists. So just conceptualizing through that, that's theory, yes, but then getting to a point where you try out one of them and it really works, has been an encouragement. Then overcoming some of these challenges, I've also learned quite a lot from my mom, because she has been in the leadership space for close to 30 years now. So, sometimes she's in the law profession. So, sometimes bouncing ideas off her and getting to talk to her about some of these challenges, she gives you that perspective from a law perspective and what she did. And you realize that the leadership principles are usually the same, regardless of whether you are you're in the vehicle industry, you're a chef, in the food industry, you're in the health industry. Some of these principles get to cut across. And especially as a young leader, one thing that I quickly learned is, sometimes by virtue of you not having the experience can really put you in a place where a lot of people are doubting and questioning your decisions, which could be right ideally, but then just by virtue of your age, they're really questioning, are you sure? You thought about it. But then one thing that I've also gotten to learn is, instead of expending your energy to prove a point, sometimes you learn quickly the importance of also just understanding the stakeholders in your team and the key stakeholders in your team. And it would really help you a lot to be an ally to one of the key stakeholders in the team. Because in such cases where you're experiencing challenges that involve decision-making, and it's not because it's a bad decision, but it's because you're perceived to be too young to be making such a decision, the stakeholder matrix comes into play. And there's someone who people really listen to and who really respect. If the idea came from that person, I mean, it would be executed in a microsecond. There's no thinking twice. So one thing that I've also learned through these challenges and has really helped me overcome even future challenges that I've experienced beyond that point to now, and even I believe that it has set me up to managing the challenges and the things that come in the future, is just getting to learn that at the end of the day, the main objective is to get the work done. Whoever gets the work done is not something you should fuss over, because the moment you start fussing over whoever gets the work done, you get to a point where you would want to get all the credit. And if you're not getting all the credit, this decision is not a good one. So at the end of the day, the most important thing, provided it's in line with the main agenda, the vision, and the main goal where you want to see the organization at, whoever makes the decision does not really matter. The most important thing is that things are moving in the right direction. Yeah. So I would say that is one challenge that I experienced, and I'm still learning. I wouldn't really say that I'm there yet, because you also get to interact with different people from different cultural backgrounds, but then the basics are the same.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. So challenges are there everywhere, different environment, learning from people. I think maybe that is one of the key things that actually inspired the kind of work that I do with the Pharmacists project. I was a consistent follow-up. David Rubenstein, the co-founder, Carlyle Group in the US in private equity. I was watching a lot of his videos. I'm like, this guy is tapping insights and knowledge from other people. That in our context, we have a challenge. We don't have that kind of guidance. We don't have that kind of mentorship. How about we just start such a conversation where we learn from each other, we mentor each other, stimulate this conversation? Because as much as we're stimulating them, we are creating new possibilities and new waves in the ecosystem. So that's amazing for me, and I'm glad that we are having this moving along. So as we come to the end of it, what would be your advice to a young pharmacist who is looking at Maryanne and saying, I'd want to be where Maryanne is, I'd want to get to that level of success or even surpass that? What would be your advice to them?
One thing I'd say is, I think it's the desire for every professional when they're looking at the generation that's behind them to actually surpass their achievements and achieve way more than they have. So the first thing I would say to the young pharmacist is that it is a world of endless possibilities. And the fact that you've seen someone there does not mean that you should look down on yourself or dim your light, but look at it as an opportunity and an assurance that you can also make it, So the challenge, I'm giving you the challenge that because we have been there, David has been there, a few other young professionals have been there, I have been there. This is also just an assurance to you that we've gone through the same education system. We all have the same opportunities in this country or even more. You are able to make it. The second thing I'd say to the young pharmacist that I'm really, really passionate about is mentorship. I would say get yourself a mentor. A mentor is not just someone who writes you a reference letter. A mentor is not just someone who you connect to because you want a job, but get a career and a professional mentor who would guide you in the areas that you think you'd want to specialize in or grow in. The most important thing for you to benefit from a mentorship relationship or a relationship with a mentor is to also just package yourself as a beginner and as someone who another person would look at and wants to mentor. And this means you really have to have your goals in place. We are not saying that you must have it all figured out where you want to be in 5 years, but have an idea of the kind of professional and the kind of spaces you'd want to be in. I'm sure by this time we all know about vision boards, and I'm 100% sure 90% of us have vision boards and like where we see ourselves. So it's good to have the same roadmap when you're approaching a mentor for you to benefit maximally from that relationship. You also need to be proactive about, do you want to meet with your mentor? Are you scheduling meetings? Are you talking about your challenges? Some of them that you believe your mentor can help you manage or solve. Sometimes handling a challenge alone helps you handle it from a myopic point of view. And you'd actually be surprised if you speak up about it or you contact someone in your pharmacy circle, maybe David or Ed. I know there are a couple of young pharmacists who are doing great things. You'd even get a solution instantly, and you even wonder why you spent the last 48 hours staying up and thinking about a challenge. And yet there's someone who's gone through this challenge for a whole year and learned all the lessons and the ropes around it. So I'll just echo what I said initially. Mentorship is years in days. It gives you an opportunity to avoid the mistakes that our predecessors went through and successfully triumphed and managed them. And it gives you an opportunity to also have someone who genuinely root for you in rooms of opportunities, because some of the opportunities that I've gotten are because my mentor called me and told me, seen this opportunity and I think this is something you can consider based on your strengths and based on your areas of interest that you always talk about. I believe this is something that you can, give it a try. And then when it comes to the point of even writing reference letters, you can imagine how beautiful it would be for someone who understands you as a person based on your strengths, based on your career trajectory, writing that letter for you. So we need to go beyond the basics. Let's genuinely look for mentors who are suited to help us, and not just mentors who look good on paper. There are people who are available, and there are people who are available and have the capability to mentor you. There are people who are available but do not have the time. So it's good to just look at the dynamics. I want to believe that there are no bad mentors. It's just that probably the scenario was not favorable to initiate that. Exactly, mentor-mentee relationship. So look for people who are available, most importantly, to at least mentor you. And I think lastly, I would say character is not built in the spotlight. We are all people who desire, I think it's an innate desire to be on the spotlight, to be featured as someone who's doing great things. That is not the point where character is built. Surprisingly, most of us don't realize that by the time you're getting to the spotlight, your character is under scrutiny. So any small thing that you do, people can blow it out of proportion because you're already in the limelight. So why am I saying this? I'm saying this because before you get to the spotlight, make all the necessary mistakes that you need to make. Be it you're a pharmacy student in your capacity, as a pharmacist intern in your capacity, this is an opportunity to make all the possible mistakes that you can make and get to learn all the lessons that you need to learn. Because when you get to a point where you're employed as a professional, some mistakes would be catastrophic. They would cost you your job. But as an intern and a pharmacy student, if you do some mistakes in the course of training, everyone will understand this is a trainee, they're being trained, we're sharpening their skills. So take advantage of that opportunity. You have to learn, you have to shadow someone, ask all the necessary questions, form your character, form your habits, so that by the time you get to the spotlight, that I believe this is a moment that would come for everyone, regardless of whatever area of practice you're in or wherever you are at. By the time you're getting to that point, you're not really struggling to forge and shape your character, because trust me, it will be under scrutiny and you won't even have the time to do the basics. So do the basics now, put in the work, form the habits that would help you get to the next level. introspect, be self-aware, be assertive, and I believe it will all work out for you. We are all rooting for you. And just in a nutshell, character cannot be built in the spotlight. The second thing, please get yourself a mentor. And most importantly, it's a world of endless possibilities. Do not be the person that does not believe in your value or does not believe in your potential. So that's what I can say, David.
Thanks so much. Actually, you said one of my main slogans in life. It's the world of possibilities. Everything that you're looking for, somebody has it somewhere and is looking at giving it to you. Unless you ask for it, you'll never get it. And maybe the last thing that I would add to this is, as much as we're doing all this, we're making all the mistakes and we're trying to carve our path, let us try as much as possible as young professionals to be human. To be human means you're capable of making mistakes, doing stupid things, but the most critical thing is to learn from them and be better, so that if today I made a terrible mistake, I won't repeat the same mistake tomorrow. And you be human, acknowledging you have limitations, you don't know everything, you're willing to learn, you ask questions. That is what will open possibilities for us. And most importantly, reach out to that person you need to talk to. So thank you so much, Maryanne. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I've enjoyed this conversation. By the virtue that you are a friend, you are a colleague, you are a peer, I feel like we have areas of interest, areas of commonalities, and I'm hoping the people who will be watching this will learn from this and will also be willing to share more so that we shape each other and form a formidable bond as we move along in our careers. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me on the platform. I think it's really a privilege to get to a point where you can interact with your peers from a point of like-mindedness, to learn from their journey, and to also just have an opportunity to also learn from theirs. So the Footprints Project has really been instrumental. I actually listen to all of them. When it's up, I listen to it, because there's some of these things that you can never really get to have the person speaking about it, to tell you about it, because by virtue of the dynamics of life, it's busy. But then through this platform, you get to learn a couple of things. And I'm also looking forward to at least partnering and just advancing the profession forward, growing the young pharmacists, and together growing to a platform where we can all say we made it. And I believe that's what we want at the end of the day. Yeah, so thank you so much for having me on the platform. It's really, really been a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.